Black Rifle Coffee, baby. Pretty cool.
We're starting now. Marty, good to have you back, buddy.
Yeah, good to be back.
Yeah? Is it?
Yeah, it actually is. Yeah, it really is. It hasn't been that long since I've been in Salt Lake. Recently we tried to make this work, and you had a little bit of fun down in Miami. And
that's right.
So been back to Salt Lake recently, but this is the first time being back in the office, getting some coffee, seeing some familiar faces, really
Makes
good.
you homesick, doesn't it?
Man,
Makes you a little bit homesick.
it sure does.
Yeah.
Just hanging out.
Can you say
shooting
that?
archery.
You can't say that.
Yeah, I say it all the time. I tell people all the time, and it's not a slight against where I work right now or anything like that, and I like the people I work with right now. But, I mean, it's real easy for me to say that the 5 years that I was here were some of the best 5 years of my life. And I thought I would never say that because, man, I had a pretty good run in the military too, where I got to do some awesome things. And, I think we all look back nostalgically at that time. But, man, that accelerant that happened in Black Rifle about the time that I came on full time and up through the IPO and after, what a special life experience, you just don't, I think you get one of those in your life, maybe, I don't know, at least for me, I don't know that I'm going to ever experience that again. And just dude, you think about some of the stuff that we did over the years, right? Like the Guatemala trip and some of the things that we were doing within Coffee or Die, even the IPO. You walk into the New York Stock Exchange and see the Black Rifle Coffee logo on every screen in the New York Stock Exchange. That's awesome. That Logan, do you remember that night that we were standing on top of the tent house, the fire department in New York, as they did the 9/11 anniversary, and you're just both of us just sitting there this is our lives.
Yeah.
There's things that you can't,
Yeah, there's those unique American moments that come and go, and there's it's easy to look back and be nostalgic throughout your whole entire life, but specifically American nostalgic. I remember for me, I floated into Pearl Harbor on the USS Pearl Harbor, and I was like, oh man,
whoa,
not very many people have gotten to do that. That's pretty rad,
Yeah.
And that being on the firehouse roof on the anniversary of 9/11 and seeing that parade was one, I can still feel the vibration of what that was like to be there. And, kind of the same. And, I have this, I really love New York, and I love the fact that it's had such a unique story within American history and our history too. Going there and being on the stock exchange together, and then also having those anniversaries with the guys in the firehouse and going to the bar and talking to the firefighters and how proud those guys are to be New Yorkers.
Yep.
And I remember Marty, I can't remember if it was right. We were there right before we went public. Because the mask mandate got lifted as we went public.
Yeah.
But then, 9/11 when we were there before, Marty got into it with this Uber driver because he didn't have a mask on, and it was I think you got kicked out of the Uber or something.
Were you yelling at the Uber driver for not having a mask on?
No,
to
he was
protect
getting into me, and what it was, I wasn't even trying to buck the rules or whatever, but whatever bar we were at or something, I left it there. And so I just didn't have it on me. And I didn't think because I was a little bit, had a few drinks at that point, wasn't really thinking. And so we go get in this Uber and everybody has it except for me. And the guy's like, you can't be in here. I'm like, what do you mean I can't be in here? I ordered the Uber. What do you mean I can't be in here? And he was just like, no, man, you can't do it. And I don't even know if it was that guy trying to be a jerk or it was just it was taken really seriously in New York. And I do empathize with New York in that man, they did actually get hit really fucking hard. I remember some of the early reporting coming out. They ran out of places to store the bodies on and out in the morgues and stuff. So I got it there, but also I was drunk. I didn't have my mask. And this guy was saying I couldn't get a ride. I'm like, I can't be trusted on these streets alone. I can't just leave me.
Yeah.
So, and I don't even remember how we resolved that. Did we resolve it or did we all get out or?
I don't know. I wasn't with you. I was you were coming to meet me for dinner. And all I remember was like how pissed off you were when you showed up.
Yeah, I was probably a little bit upset. Yeah,
Yeah, I like that. That experience, I think, is like it's so incredible when I think about it from just a historical significance, and then getting to participate in those moments is, obviously as a participant, but also as an observer, because I'm observing too.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and I always think about it. My kids got to press the button.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they'll never know the significance of that, but I know it. It actually meant way more, and I did too, right? But
And when they're older and they see the pictures of them doing that, and And by the way, this is a great topic because we're coming up on 10 years of Black Rifle Coffee.
10 years.
And this is like, man, what a little, if we can go down a little bit of a nostalgia hole here. Like,
I think we should.
Yeah,
I think we should, because I the first thing I wanted to ask you was like, the first assignment you did, real like remote assignment for Coffee or Die, that I remember was your embed SF trip.
Yep.
That was like the one that I remember distinctly. Was like, you got to go. Let's go.
That was the first thing that I did. That was actually, I remember talking to Matt because I reported to Matt at that time when I first got brought on, and I was like, hey, so I got an opportunity to go back over and like do some stuff nobody else was getting to do access wise at that time, because they'd shut down embeds overseas for the most part.
Yeah.
It wasn't like what it was back in like the aughts when guys were just, like Sebastian Younger and stuff would just go hang out for months at a time. Like that wasn't happening anymore. And I think he was just like, yeah, man, sounds good. Like, yeah, go do it. I'm like, okay. And I think I remember talking to you, Logan, of like, hey, what do I all need to get? And you were just like, everything. Take photos, video, like everything.
Everything.
And it ended up turning into this really cool thing because there was a couple of different opportunities that I was supposed to have. One of them ended up falling through for a reason I'm not going to say on the podcast. I'll tell you guys about it later. But one particular opportunity fell through. But what I ended up getting to go do was embed with a dive team from 3rd Battalion, 1st Special Forces Group out in eastern Nangarhar, like 8 kilometers from the Pakistan border. And these were the guys I specifically wanted to do a story on. This is a war that most of America has forgot or actively is trying to forget. They don't want to think about this. This is like old news in their head. They're thinking about other things and all this other stuff. Who were the last Americans fighting in Afghanistan? Who are the last Americans fighting this war? And as there was a couple more years, and they definitely weren't going to be the last guys to, be hurt or killed over there. But they were among the last guys. And what was crazy is you're thinking that would have been, so that was spring 2018. They were just getting into the spring fighting season, and you've got this ODA out there. It's one ODA, one platoon of uplift, and they're out on, a postage stamp out in bad guy territory, just past where the Moab had been dropped in 2017, the year before. So they dropped that Moab to clear that valley, and then these guys moved in and established this little cop. They initially called it OP Bravo, and then when I was there, they used me. They were like, hey, when you write the article, can you call it Cop Blackfish? Because their team logo was an orca. And I was like, yeah, let's do that. So I think we were the first people to call it Cop Blackfish. And so these guys, like I said, 17-ish years into this war, they're shitting in wag bags, eating MREs twice a day, round the clock, 24 hours a day, 120s and 81s into the high points around to keep people off the ridge lines. Gun runs multiple times a day. That Jay Tecker, he was a combat controller that was attached to him. I mean, that guy was getting after it. He's probably a legend in their community for like what he was doing on that trip. And you just think like and the American people at the time were being told that there's no Americans in active combat, right? Like that was the party line, which is what surprised me about them letting me come out and not just see this, but like actively video and like, hey, here's guys like literally getting shot at. We did that whole video, and half the video was a firefight. It wasn't the craziest firefight in the world, and they definitely got into hairier. That so where cop was the Momond Valley. Where that firefight took place was the Bagdara Valley right next door, the valley over. And they ended up going back there multiple times. I kept in communication with those guys. I still do to this day, but kept in communication. They ended up, multiple guys got injured on that deployment. They were getting after it in a real serious way. And so that story, every single person in that story had a pseudonym. We couldn't use their names. The ground rules going out there were no names, no faces. And, from a storytelling perspective, it's like, man, those are kind of some cool constraints to work with because you can get really creative with that. That video turned out pretty good. I look at it and I didn't clean the sensor on the camera, and so there's a couple of specks in there from when I changed lenses out there, and so that irritates me to this day.
It's got to be gritty, man.
Yeah, it irritates me to this day though, because it's like, you got to clean your sensor, Marty. Come on, basic maintenance. It's like clean your rifle after the mission, right? But yeah, we went and did this, and the best part about that was it was like, I think a core black rifle piece of content in that it was like by our core customers for them.
Yeah.
It was SF guys out going and doing the thing. They had bags of black rifle out there that had gone over in the care packages. And these guys, when they saw the story come out and the video come out, they're quite professionals, but they're like, man, this is really cool. This is like something that they can show their kids, their family. This is like, hey, this is what dad did, without compromising OPSEC or PERSEC or anything like that. Like, we did it right.
Yeah, and an experience too, right? Like, we were talking about Funker 530 the last time that I was on the show, and you can digest it through that medium, which is kind of like little snippets, right? But through that video piece and in the written article too, which was really like you really get to understand the experience, and it did tie back to some of the work that Sebastian Unger did in some of the documentaries that he did, but it seemed like you had this really interesting perspective because you had done that previously, that you were kind of just accepted and integrated into it. And so you had more of this behind the scenes, but it was a part of it, and like commentary about those little moments, the mundane that we don't think really matters when we're experiencing, but looking back on it, we tend to have sentimental and nostalgic moments about it, because it doesn't seem like it's important in those moments. But that's when you can really build character, and that's what you did throughout the video. And the written piece is like, what guy liked to watch what movie and what resident. So like you can really understand these guys and these SF dudes in a whole different capacity, like a warfighting thing. And then like you see the duality of what it's like for them to digress and like calm down so that they can continue fighting in this conflict and continue doing well in it, and doing it in a multitude of different ways. Looking at that from like some of the clearing operations that they had, it was very reminiscent of some stuff. I was just like, you're always fucking working. Yep. Like it's not like there's not a whole lot of boredom because there's always work to be done.
Yep. And they were doing that too. I mean, that's, Evan, I'm sure you experienced this quite a bit, where there's a lot of people like to think of the idea of being a Green Beret as, sexy and always just doing cool guy stuff. And certainly there's that element to it. But also, hey, those guys were like out there filling sandbags. They were trying to build a cop out from an OP. Like they were doing construction. They're bringing gravel in. They're like,
there's fucking have space and timing on this 50 ready to fucking go or what?
Yeah, exactly. Like it was a real look at, like, again, like these kind of forgotten guys in a forgotten war at that point. Like nobody cared about the war again until the withdrawal. 3 years later.
I think that you're exactly right. I mean, I'll steal a quote from Jeff Kirkham, which we like years ago. It's like war is work. Like that's the other thing is people they think about it from the context of Hollywood. They think about it from the cool and the sexy, and they think about it from the recruiting imagery and things like that, which is like free fall and dive and like shooting and like flashlights and cool gear. And it's like, actually, it's just bone breakingly difficult, hard, and sometimes very monotonous, boring work. And you have to fucking put in the work. And if you're complacent and you're lazy, you're going to get fucking killed. That's just the bottom line. But to go back, it's like, highlighting, it's like, it's just work. Like
Yeah.
filling sandbags is not sexy at all. But how many dudes have filled sandbags?
Yep.
How many dudes have like dug a hole and then turned around, the next day and dug another fucking hole, right?
Yep.
It's like, oh, you keep digging holes. Oh, cool. That's sexy as shit, isn't it?
Yeah.
Woo! Look at special ops digging holes.
Yep. Yeah. And for the guy that we called Cotton, the team sergeant, in that, he was like an OIF 1 dude. Like he'd been doing it for a long time. And then it was also kind of a unique look. And like you had a guy like him and some of his senior Bravo and some of those guys who have been around for a while. But then he had like 3 guys, that video that we got, 3 guys on that ODA got their CIB on that mission, so they're relatively new. And just some of the cool touch points of like when I showed up, that kind of immediate buy-in there was like, they knew I came from regiment and stuff. And then even more so, their junior Echo was their junior communications sergeant. He came from regiment. His platoon sergeant was my tab spec 4 when I was in battalion.
Whoa.
So you know how everybody plays we all sniff
the
each
name
other's
game,
butts and stuff, and it was real quick with that, and so it was real easy right off the bat just to jump in with those guys, and it's like, hey man, like pretty much whatever you want to do, like let us know, and there was that trust there, and they knew I wasn't there to do some sort of salacious tell-all or anything like that, and like I said, at the end of the day, really appreciated that. And the crazy part about that, like you talk about like getting on the rocket ship of Black Rifle Coffee. I jump onto that. That's the first thing that I go do. Like my first 2 weeks at work were just getting ready to go do that, while also I've still got the drawings of me drawing out like how I wanted the Coffee or Die website to look like and all that sort of stuff to give to Mod and all that. So trying to do all that sort of stuff, get ready for Afghanistan, get the visas and all that sort of stuff. And then speaking of Normandy coming up here, as soon as I got back from that Afghanistan trip, I had to turn around like a week later or 10 days later and go to Normandy and do the one-man band thing over there. And that was my first, 2-3 months at Black Rifle Coffee as a full-time dude. I mean, I've been around, you guys know, for a while, but like that full-time is like, and then it never slowed down.
No.
Like it just rocket ship. And that's where I say like, man, 5-year piece of your life that like, you're never going to experience another thing like that again, because nobody goes as hard as we did back then.
No.
Like nobody goes that hard. Mm-mm. That's special,
Well, and it's you're capturing every second of opportunity that you have, like, and I'm not like looking back on it reminiscent, because there's like
there's some tough days.
Yeah, there's a lot of tough days, right? It's like,
Yep.
You've got a lot of things where it's just one, it's like business is work.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's the other thing. It's like there's no difference. Like it's like, you can look at the Instagram pages of guys like, pulling up to their private jets and Maseratis and shiny watches. Yeah, that's cool. And maybe they figure out a hack, but actually there is no hack. It's just bone-breakingly difficult, hard fucking work. And that's just a lot of fucking work. Like the stuff that you were doing was like, in some ways it was like the stuff that we all wanted to be doing, but we are also doing other shit. Matt and I were like, we've had this saying forever, right? Where it's like, you go left, I go right. You go left, I go right. So we're still like just clearing rooms.
Yep.
Yeah. And like, I came into the office one day and Jared and I were talking, and we were talking about doing something epic. And I was like, we should jump a helicopter with a motorcycle.
Yep.
And we drew this thing on the wall in his office. It was a chalkboard drawing. And I was like, let's jump a fucking little bird and let's have Travis do it with a motorcycle. And then we'll have Ken Block down below it in a rally car. And then the minigun will be spinning around like dumping fucking brass. And we were like, well, we'd have to do it with blanks, because obviously you can't jump a fucking helicopter that's shooting miniguns.
It's hard to find a 360 range these days.
It's hard. And 2 years later, we did it.
Yep.
2 years later, we did it.
That same year, we threw a Vulcan cannon on a Prius.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was 2018, I want to say.
Yeah.
And God, those things were just happening left and right.
Yeah,
You know, it was one crazy, ridiculous. I think it was you, and I think you took it from somebody, right? But it was big, hairy, audacious goals.
Yeah.
Those are the days. 10,000 veterans, fucking epic videos. Go hard, go faster than everybody else. Do it more, do it better, in every aspect. The coffee's going to be better. The roasting is going to be better. The coffee shops are going to be better. Yes, we're going to do coffee shops. Yes, we're going to. I think those were even the early days of you launched ECS that year.
Yeah.
Or was that 2019 maybe?
I can't remember. No,
But it was early on
something,
there.
Yeah.
Yeah, early on there. Like there was a bunch of stuff going on really hard. And you guys, like I kind of jumped in. You guys were a couple of years into it full time. I missed the days of like you guys out there in the warehouse, like packing shit. You're not, because Matt just dropped a video that crushed the website.
Shut down the website.
Yeah.
We couldn't fulfill anything for 30 days because we didn't have inventory. We had to roast. We had to like we were backlogged on every fucking thing for months on end. So then we were constantly trying to rebuild or build capacity. Like we dropped our roaster in Salt Lake, which was a 60 kilo roaster that Ed and Rob had driven out to Connecticut to pick up. And by the time we got it back, and by the time it was like bolted to the floor in Salt Lake, we were already out of capacity. Like we were like, okay, we need another one. So then it's like, well, we got to build a roasting facility in Manchester, Tennessee. And the way I did that was like map overlays. You remember that shit?
Yeah.
It's like map overlays, and like we were trying to figure out where to put it. And then I think it was Robin. I think it might have been Robin. She'd come in and like there's a place in Coffee County, and it wasn't too far from where FedEx and some of these other places were. And I was like, we got to go to Coffee County. There's no other place we need to put a roasting facility but Coffee County, Tennessee. And she's like, what other variables are there for selection? I was like, I think they just passed all of them based on the name of the coffee or the county. And then she's like, okay, shit. Yeah. And that was...
Your dad went out there.
Yeah,
and
my dad
busted his ass.
Yeah, my dad has been like the guy turning wrenches behind it for like years, right? And he kind of pseudo built the roaster in Salt Lake, went out and helped build the facility in Manchester. And like, it's just been like, go, go, go. I mean, really, like, it took a little while. It took a couple years to build up enough inertia. And then it was like, fucking go.
Yep.
And really, like, it's never stopped. Like, it's really just never fucking stopped.
And it's never been, at least from my memory of how those years transpired, like Vulcan on a Prius, like Marty embedded with SF. We were never like, we did it, guys. Like, there was never like, I don't remember one single pat on the back that's like, yeah,
we never pat ourselves on the back. One time we're like, okay, what's the next thing? Oh, what are we doing? Oh, well.
Usually you're working on the next thing while trying to execute the last thing. Yeah. Like you're never not doing two or three things at a time. I mean, it was just moving. It was like follow on targets, right?
I mean, the 777 was last year.
Yeah.
Was it really?
Yeah, it was last year.
Yeah, January 23, we finished it.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It was last year.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like 7 continents in 6 days, which logistically like was significant. And then to accomplish a world record and then do it with folds of honor, like Andy and you and Jericho and Semenoff and all these dudes, like it's fucking crazy.
Yeah.
Like it's a crazy big, hairy, audacious goal.
Yeah. I actually went to the premiere of the documentary last night.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, it premiered at the Alamo Draft House in Austin.
How was that?
That's cool.
It was good, man. It was good. It's cohesively very interesting as each chapter is one of the locations of the jump and then kind of the backstory on each of the jumpers and who they're jumping for. So it is really, if I had to surmise it, it's one very long memorial video for the guys that we were jumping for, which is what I think it really should be. But looking back on that, you're like, I can't believe that we did this. Like I'm just flabbergasted that it was able to happen, and that we were able to put some of this stuff together. And and then to have the tie-in to where Folds of Honor was such a big part of it. And we've worked with Folds of Honor a little bit here and there, and then kind of come back to it. And that was the thing. Like the documentary didn't directly address, but like we didn't end up raising, the full $7 million goal that we had, like 777, right? 7 jumps, 7 continents, raise $7 million. But like, you think about how difficult it is to raise like $7 million today. Like that's a very tall task. And I think it's more important to say, just because that didn't get done in the time frame that we were training and did that, which was a 6-month, process in the totality, like doesn't mean that that's, completely done. And I had like this awesome discussion. So I called, I jumped for Matt Abate, who was in my scout sniper platoon, and I called his mom the other day, and I was like, the documentary's coming out for this, and she's like, I can't believe that you did this, and like, I'm so glad that you were able to memorialize. I ended up talking to his mom for like an hour, and she started filling me in on his son, Matt's son, Carson, and he's like, and she sent me a photo of him. Kid's just like a splitting image of his dad, like the square jaw, like the stoic, like handsome look, and I'm just like, oh my God, it's like looking at him in the flesh. And then Larry from Folds of Honor was at the premiere last night, and I kind of told him, I'm like, they were just over the moon that he's gonna get scholarship. He's like, I'm gonna walk him throughout whatever he wants to do. He's like, I'm gonna like personally get him through school. And I was like, oh my God, this is so incredible. Like I can't believe that this is happening right now. Like I don't care about the record. Like that's more cool to me that's gonna happen than skydiving in Antarctica. And those are like the little takeaways. Like, yeah, it was really cool to take the company public on the New York Stock Exchange, but like being able to like pay for Gold Star Sun's like education, like it's right.
Yeah,
there.
that's the thing is like IPO, sure, it's like it's a cool high point, but it was one of many high points and different types of high points. The different philanthropy that happened over the years, the difference that we made in like individuals' lives, that their life will be changed now because of some of these things that happened. The early total archery challenges, there's a lot of things going on. I even think about small things like the night we were out at the ranch. I think it was like Christmas time or something like that. But like you had a set of quad tubes out there and you put them on my daughter's head and she was outside looking through these quad tube nods. And I've got that picture and I'm just like, it's just little things like that you think about that, they pair real nicely with the big things that are the big fence post things. It just, God, what an experience.
Yeah. It's the big, hairy, audacious goals. I think that's Built to Last or Good to Great. I forget exactly which book that's from, but it's from Collins is the author. He's written several different business books, and it's like every year
the most bought business books in the world. I think so.
Like
yeah.
He's
those are kind of the Bible.
It's the Bible. Like
yeah.
You have to. If you haven't read them, if you're interested in it, you absolutely have to pick those up because they are the Bible, and you have to go back to them about every other year that you're in business. And for me, I was going back to them like every year. Now I've kind of like memorized a lot of it, so it's more institutional within the process in which I'm trying to plan and execute. But it's never ends, right? So it's like this year was UFC. It's UFC, big partnership with them. Then, okay, of course I've got something on my fucking sleeve for next year. Of course, right? It's like every year you have to keep pushing. More importantly, like the reason and the weight and the gravity of it is the older we get, right? As we all sit here as, veterans of the GWAT from similar units, what I would say is the cornerstone of the foundation of our tactical experience. The foundation is in the infantry, and we're all sitting here as like basically infantry guys. And the infantry carried the heavy rucksack throughout the entire GWAT. And you have the burden and the opportunity, which is sometimes equally balanced, to be a beacon of hope for an entire generation of warfighters to go out and do epic shit. Like, and more importantly, when you're in that driver's seat, it's not necessarily that you want to be. It's if you find yourself in that seat, you have to. It is your duty to go out and do these things. You have to. It's not about your fucking ego. It's not about like how cool we are and like flexing up against other companies. It's like, no, man, we have an entire generation of GWAT warfighters. We're separated by 10 years. What, you're 37, 38? Same.
Yeah.
You know, I'm 10 years. Like, we have 20 years of warfighters out there that have continued to go back to back on multiple different deployments. And more significantly is the challenges that they meet when they come home post-war, post-conflict, integration back into civilian life, transitions from, military into their careers and their professional endeavors. Like, there's a lot of what I would say, and we know it, right? It's like there's a lot of challenges that they'll face. And if they don't have people, companies, different things that are happening that are out there trying to spread what I would say is positive fuel to put back in their tanks and inspire them to go out and do great things, we're not fulfilling our duty and our obligation to the men that we have served with. And I would go on record by saying, like, much greater men than myself, that I owe them this. Like, that's what I owe. Like, it's my price. Because if I did anything differently, it would be, one, it wouldn't be the correct amount. Like, I owe them everything. So that's what I owe. I'm just paying the right price, fulfilling the duty of going out and doing it for an entire generation of people. And I think you guys feel the same way. Could be wrong.
If you're still around at this point, then you don't have any other choice but to go as hard as you can.
Yeah.
Like, that's, and do as great of things as you can. I think you raised great points there, and that's all very altruistic. I mean, even just like for me personally, I look at it as like, hey, like, I hope I'm a better writer than I was a ranger. Like, I'm trying to be better tomorrow than I was yesterday, and even if you get out of the military, I think that's a cornerstone of what it means to be a veteran in America. Is the military is your foundation for most of us, and then you go out, and now your job is to take that and go build America. Just like World War II vets did when they came back, and what, half the Fortune 500 today is started by World War II vets, right? Like it's honestly like, what's the GWAT generation going to do?
Is that half of the Fortune 500?
Don't quote me on that. It's a substantial amount.
It's a substantial
don't quote me on
percentage, and
that.
it's either World War I, World War II, and Vietnam. If you took the, we'll say even like the top 1,000 corporations in America, it's a huge percentage. It's overwhelming, actually.
Yep. And that's like, okay, so, we come into, I don't think our times are any more challenging than other times. We just, I think we're more aware of our challenges now because of things like social media, 24-hour news, things like that. We're just more, I think we perceive it, or a lot of people these days perceive these times to be harder than they were in the past. I think humans have been facing challenges for long before America was even a thing, right? Like, there's been a lot of hard times throughout history. I don't know if you've ever heard of the Black Plague. So, there's, we've got our own unique sets of challenges these days and all that sort of stuff. It doesn't matter. If we can put up with fighting a fucking 20-year war, and figuring out how to win at the tactical level, at least, every step of the way, then certainly we should be able to take the uniform off, go out and continue to do great things, and continue to build upon the foundation that is America, because we're still a really young nation. We're a young nation. We're not at the stage yet where we can all just be like, put the hands back, kick the feet
Chill
up.
time, yo.
Yeah, no, we're still building here.
Yeah, and that purpose can kind of come from a couple different avenues as well. I think we kind of typically look at, because we came from a military background, like, we want our work life to be that really fulfilling thing. But that's not always necessarily the case when you get into the civilian side of things. Your work may just be like the thing that you do to pay the bills. And then the other thing that you're doing as a discipline or a sport or a recreation can be the thing that you kind of pour your passion into, that kind of builds that image and checks those boxes in your head that you're still improving and you're still like living it into the person and one-upping yourself, that setting that bar continually higher and higher. And I was thinking of this story as you guys were talking. Like I went out to Patrol Base Abate, another nonprofit, and like doing fireside chats. And I know you went out there and you met Sebastian Unger out there, which is super cool that was able to happen. But it was like little fireside chats, and this one dude was talking. He's like, he's just a grunt, and he's like, I'm a janitor, and he's like, I do the same thing every single day, but like I do it for people that I really fucking care about, and like I have this like passion for jujitsu that like the job like is just the thing that pays the bill. Like it doesn't really matter because I have like the know-all that like I'm really helping people in this thing that I'm doing to pay the bills, and then I have this like purpose-built like improvement side of I was like, holy fuck! Like if this dude can be happy, like anybody should be able to be happy, right?
We were talking earlier about some of my siblings. You know, I have a sister right now who she cleans hospital rooms. She's the one that comes in when the room turns over. She has to go in and clean that thing. It is not glamorous work, not at all. But I think about her and people like the janitor and other people that do these really sort of thankless jobs and often really overlooked jobs. You know, we like to point out police and fire and paramedics and, you know, doctors and things like that, right? As like, oh, they're really good for society and give so much. But like, man, the people doing thankless stuff like that and the dirty jobs, it's inspiring to me. You know, it's infinitely harder. And anybody that does that, I just think they are doing more for America than probably they realize, and probably more than most of us, you know? And that's not to denigrate me, you, or anybody else. That's just like, man, what they are doing. If you're a janitor, if you're somebody, and I think of it from like the Christian perspective of like, you know, one of the stories in the Bible is when Jesus went and washed you know, one of the disciples' feet and dried it with his hair and stuff. Like, it was like, here he is, you know, the Son of God, and he's going out and cleaning somebody's feet, you know. And you think about like feet back then, like people didn't wear shoes. Like that was like, think about what a foot was back then. Like really think about that, you know, like that is like, you know, and I'm not trying to like turn this into like a religious conversation, but I just think about those things and I look at that as like, that's an example of what it means to be a good person, a contributing member of society, somebody that's not looking for glory or fame or anything like that. And I think that they are so much more altruistic than I ever am, because at the end of the day, you know, I write a story, I put my name on it. And of course, you know, I feel good when people like what they read from me or watch from me and stuff. You know, you get a little bit out of that. Like, man, the janitor, the person turning over a hospital room, the guy picking up your trash at the end of the street, like those people, there's no glory in that, but they're like, God, where is our society without them?
Yeah, what do they call the invisible workforce, right? Because they're often overlooked, and it's a thankless position for the most part, what you just said. And it's like just having the common courtesy to go through your day and say thank you. I mean, it means, I don't know if it means more to the individual, but it definitely says, hey, I recognize the people that do those things. And I think once you hire and have a workforce, it does make you appreciate people in all their positions. It really does. Like, because I think about, you know, people that are roasting coffee, like that is mundane. It's like, it's not like sexy hipster, you know, Henry Rollins playing in the background and fucking nose rings, and like it's just like, no,
I'm
man,
pretty sure I saw a nose ring around the roasters a couple of times
for sure. But it's like, it's just work, right? It's like monotonous work, and
it's not the little 1 pound roaster you started off with back in your hipster days. It's big industrial roasters.
Man, it's so funny. Like, you think about it, it's like the years I've been roasting coffee and the times I've been accused of being a hipster because I roast coffee, and it's like, then you see this like surge of like of of coffee companies, and it's like just kind of like it irritates me, and it also like makes me happy at the same time, because it's like, oh well,
What'd you expect to happen?
It's such an impact on people where it's like, oh wait, what irritates me is like, hey, listen, like coffee is something you have to be passionate about. And if you're really a coffee roaster, if you're really committed to the passion, the artisan of the craft, then it shows through. You actually can talk about it. You can talk about it. You have a significant weigh in. You understand what's happening in the market, not from a market conditions and like, you know, a commodity perspective. You understand what's happening, what's new and exciting.
Yep.
What's disheartening about some of it is like people that don't have any interest in coffee and they just think they can fucking slap a label on a bag. And you're like, yo, that's like very disingenuous. It's almost like stolen valor, where I'm like, fuck you. You don't know anything about coffee. Like, stop. Just stop. But at the same time, I'm like, well, they started because they saw like,
and ultimately there is a little bit of a gateway drug there in that. I remember one of the early times we talked back at the facility here in Salt Lake. I think you guys shared it with like a lawn mowing company or something that.
Yeah.
And I remember sitting around talking, and I was telling us like, yeah, man, I'm really into coffee. And well, I didn't even know when I said I'm really into coffee, I was the guy that like in our like squad room, I was always the guy that would like make the coffee and try to measure it out and do all that stuff. But it was like with the Mr. Coffee. And the only other variety of making coffee that I was aware of was like a French press, which I knew how to do. I didn't know about Chemexes. I didn't know about pulling espresso shots. I didn't know about, you know, I couldn't have told you the difference between, you know, that water temperature can make on the final outcome, things like that. I had no idea. So I'm sitting here talking to you and being like, yeah, man, I'm really into coffee. And I think you kind of looked at me like, I think you could kind of see like, you're like, yeah, sure, man. Like, and it wasn't until I started working here that it was like, oh, I didn't know shit about coffee. Like I said, I'm into coffee and everything, but I'm buying Folgers off the rack at the grocery store. And, you know, I just didn't know what I didn't know at that time. But because I legitimately thought that I was into coffee once I was exposed into stuff. Logan, do you remember there's like an early video that I did where I was like trying to show how to do a pour over and I didn't pre-wet the filter, and you're like, dude, you can't put that fucking up. Like, and I was like, what do you mean? And you're like, you didn't pre-wet the filter. You
didn't flush. You didn't flush. You
and
didn't flush the filter.
Oh, I didn't even know. So, you know, it was like a little bit of a process there. And what was kind of actually cool, you know, talking about that transition over Black Rifle over the years, as you know, built out like the Coffee or Die team, the FRA team and stuff like that. We started doing these mandatory classes where we'd get Ed out there to the ranch or whatever. And like, hey, everybody's going to know how to make pour over coffee. And then we're going to move to French press. And there was this entire, you know, I had a bunch of like writers and storytellers and things like that people weren't inherently maybe there for the coffee aspect of it. Not that they hated coffee, but they didn't know any of this stuff either. Yeah. So now I've got all these people, and some of them I still work with now today that now work with me at Task and Purpose, and they still have a new and higher appreciation of coffee. So there was a little bit of like discipleship going on, right? Like, and that's a good thing. Mm-hmm. That's a good thing. Yeah. And spreading knowledge.
Weird.
Yeah. As far as the hipster thing goes, like, man, I could give you shit, but like I'm sitting over here, like I've got like vintage typewriters at home and I'm like into first edition books and I'm making my Chemex in the morning and like I'm a little bit, you know,
like I think that label is like hipster, right? Where it's like hipsters have like ruined the ability for people to be really into artisan crafts, and they've like monopolized certain industries. So when we first came in and they had monopolized coffee, and that was one of the things that like really fucking irritated me, because I would go to these places and it's like, I share nothing in common with these people other than coffee, which was fine because like I'm way into coffee. But outside of that, there wasn't a whole lot going on there. I mean, I make this joke all the time. I'm like, you know, I walked into this coffee shop in Seattle. I'll never forget this. Like I've got like significant amounts of stories, but the dude behind the counter, I'm trying to have a conversation with him about coffee. Like, hey, what machine? And I was trying to find, what I was trying to find was Slayer espresso machines was relatively new. So I was going to different coffee shops in Seattle trying to find actual espresso made from the Slayer. So I'd found one. I'm not going to reference it because one, it doesn't exist anymore, and two, it was just like, fuck, so lame. And the guy behind the counter, he looked like he was working on a bicycle in 1890. He had a fucking curly Q, weird mustache, and he looked like he was part bicycle mechanic, part logger. There's no callus that had ever been formed on his fucking hands ever in his life. He knew nothing about coffee. He was fucking completely functionally illiterate when it came to coffee. But he thought he knew everything about it. And I'm like, this guy's an idiot. He's just trying to look this part of part logger, part fucking giant wheeled bicycle mechanic guy with a leather apron and a flannel and a fucking curly Q mustache. And it's just looked like such an idiot. And I was like, now I just I see there's a style associated with this that is not substantive. It's not meaningful. It doesn't actually directly translate into the way this guy is curating my experience. And he's treating me like a dipshit because, and everybody in their little subgenres, by the way, does this. So if you go into an archery shop, and this is a quick diatribe. You go into an archery shop, half those guys in archery shops, and this is part of the reason why people don't get into archery, is because they act like they fucking know everything about arrows and bows, and it's really complex, and they're arrogant because they have just a little bit more knowledge than everybody else around them, right? Coffee was the same way. You'd go in and they just had a little bit more knowledge than the guy that might drink Mr. Coffee, and they weren't willing to share anything. And if they're stupid on top of that, it also makes them they have this coffee hubris that allows them to be stupid and arrogant at the same time, and it makes you really fucking angry. So then it was dude, I'm gonna make a coffee company for guys like us.
Yeah.
Hey man, if you want to be a little bit on the spectrum about things and go down into the details, and you're also kind of a knuckle dragger, this is your shit.
Mm-hmm.
This is where you can find a clear home for coffee and guys that like to drag their knuckles around a little bit. At the heart of our hearts, to be fair, we're all still kind of infantry dudes sitting here. To be fair, right? We still kind of love. You and I are you were blue cord through and through, your entire time. I was there for a little while, but it's still kind of 11 series at heart for you. What do they call Marines?
I think you're the most infantry guy
you're
here,
the most
honestly.
infantry guy here.
Yeah, you didn't have a blue cord, but you were the most infantry of the infantry here.
If I had a nickel for every time Matt said, fucking Marine, if I've ever seen one, fucking Marine, god damn it.
Yeah.
I'd have a lot more nickels,
Yeah. The thing that irritates me the most is when I go into a coffee shop. It's not the arrogance. It's not any of that stuff. It's every time I do all this research in whatever different city that I'm in, and I'm trying to find a really cool coffee shop where I can get a good pour over and see how they do it. And, I'm really curious about that. I put all this time and effort into finding one, and I go in there and I can see a V60 and a Chemex and all this stuff on the wall. And I'm like, I would like a pour over. What beans do you have available? And they're like, oh, sorry, man, we don't do pour overs. And it's really the guy or gal behind the counter doesn't want to do the effort. They just want to give you the stuff on brew. And I'm like, I know what that is. I know what that is, and I know what that is, and I know what and I can see the filters over there, and I can see the grinder right there.
Let's do it.
I would like a good, if I wanted just the thing that you pull the lever on and give you, then I would just go to Starbucks or Dunkin' Donuts or whatever, Caribou Coffee, any of those places. I can go get the same thing there. But if you offer it, this is why I came here. This is why I went 8 blocks out of my way. Please just make me a pour over.
Right.
I just would like a pour over, please.
Yeah, I think it's just so rare that people want to go down the rabbit hole. And you're starting to see it pick up a little bit more and a little bit more. And I think, we have hopefully had a large part to do with that in our specific community. But I always think of like Jack Carr. Like every time I have a conversation with him, like, what are you drinking now? And he's like, I want a one-touch coffee machine. Like I don't want to fiddle with equipment. He's like, I'm too busy to mess with any of that stuff. So I'm like, all right, yeah, I know that guy's pretty fucking busy. So like that's understandable.
You know,
like,
I
want to do that
lately. We went and picked. I tried to go find a coffee machine that was SCA certified, but could make a big 12 cup.
Yeah.
You know, I didn't want to just do the Mr. Coffee thing. I wanted something that was going to be able to make good coffee. So because at the end of the day, like we had my daughter's 3rd birthday recently, a bunch of people over. I'm not going to make 30 fucking pour overs. No. So having one of those, we ended up buying one of those again, and we kind of keep it in the basement when we don't have company, but it's nice to have that. But even with that, it's there is a place for that. There is a place for the one touch. It grinds the beans, and if you get a good one, you spend a little bit more money and get a good one, it's still going to produce like a good cup of coffee and all of that. But I still think, like, specifically with the pour over, I never went quite down the rabbit hole that you guys did with the espresso shots. I think both of you guys really got into the pulling like the perfect shot. I never quite went down that rabbit hole just because I didn't have an espresso machine at home. But I went as far as I could on doing the pour over and trying to get really good at that. And now it's just more of, it's almost like a meditative thing. Now it's a good way to start your day. It's a good, like, it's not just the byproduct of, oh, I'm going to drink a hot cup of good. It's I have to do math right off the bat in my head, and I have to go through a series of steps that I have to think about. And I don't know, it's just, it's more than coffee at a certain point. Now we're getting a little bit flowery here.
It's great though. I think
know?
it's great. I mean, I've passed the point now where everything is, and now I'm in a new phase right now where I'm past the point where I get out to scale every morning. Mm-hmm. Now what I do is I just try to make it at proper ratios by look. So like literally I'm just looking at the coffee. It's not because I'm lazy. It's because I'm searching for something different where I'm like, I just want to do everything to see if I have the eye to make a proper ratioed cup of coffee just by looking at it. Like, okay, does this feel about right? And honestly, like if you're looking at, the roast level of your coffee, it does actually change how much coffee is in your filter. And it's way more difficult than I thought it would be. So I take away the scale and I'm basically making a blind cup, and it's given me a whole new challenge because it's super fun where I'm like,
do you
this
still
is
weigh
super
the
fun.
coffee though?
No.
So you're eyeballing the
eyeball
amount of
everything.
coffee,
So
you're eyeballing the water.
I've been doing this for years where I'm like, for years I have looked at the coffee. I'll pour it in, I'll grind it, and then I'll like weigh it out to see how close I was to 30 grams. So I've been doing this like rep after rep. I've had fucking hundreds of reps on this. And I'm to the point of which like I've always been about plus or minus 3 grams, which is pretty fucking
good.
close.
Yeah.
And then there's a lot of mornings I'd be like spot on, like at 30.1 or, 30 point something. So I'm like, all right, well now I'm just going to try to fucking eye it to see how close I can get. And it's a whole new challenge. It's super fun. And sometimes I'm a little bit dark, sometimes a little bit light, but for the most part, I've been pretty accurate. And it's also allowed me to taste the coffee a little bit differently. So that's kind of where I'm at. It's like a new challenge, new thing.
That would be hard though, because the difference in how much it looks like you have from a light roast to a dark roast. And then if you start getting into like light to medium, that would be really hard.
It's difficult. Sometimes I'm way off. Like sometimes I'm way off. Like I'm like, oh God, this is super strong, or ew, this is way too weak.
Do you at a certain point when you're doing this, are you looking more at like paying less attention to the roast level and more just like the size of the bean? Because they get bigger
both.
the more you roast them. So are you like, okay, these are all really small here, I'm not even going to try to estimate like how far on the scale of light it is. I'm just, hey, it looks about that much, so it should look about like this much when it's ground.
Yes, both. Like
Gotcha.
I'm like looking at everything. So it's like, what type of bean is it? What's the roast level? So if it's darker, if it's lighter, so obviously it's going to be smaller if it's lighter. So if it's dark, you're going to have more in your filter. If it's going to be less, or if it's going to be lighter, you're going to have less in your filter. So it's like we just lost like 70% of the audience talking about this, but
I was gonna say
however,
we went way down the hole.
however,
Yeah.
it's super fun. This is a coffee podcast. So like it's everything. So you have to take in all the variables and then you like run the traps on it to figure out if you're like even close. I would not recommend this, unless you're like super comfortable with weighing it every morning. I mean, or else you're just
Probably
gonna
start
come up
off with
like,
not your most expensive beans.
yeah,
This isn't the stuff to pull out the geisha on. And
no, and expect it to be like you're gonna have some really bad cups.
yeah,
It's not gonna be good.
Yeah, I like to, as far as pulling espresso shots, I like to compare it to imagine you're a precision shooter and you've got your range card and you've got your dose for each range, right? But imagine based on what time of day it was and the humidity conditions, your dope and your range has changed for that rifle. Like that's what it's like trying to constantly pull the perfect shot of espresso because the humidity in the air and has such a profound impact on how that coffee bean is going to be grinded that it can be completely different at 6 a.m. to 12 noon. And you're like, oh my God, why does this matter? It's insane, the minuscule amount of changes they have to make to keep it perfect. And if you ever go into a coffee shop and you should be getting an espresso and like just to understand like what it should taste like and like try and find that perfect one so you know what the perfect Americano tastes like, because if you ever try it and you're like, oh, it's just burnt,
Americanos, man.
It's like
they're
the barista's fucking it up.
The baristas.
And it's not just that type of coffee drink. Like they're fucking it up. They're not maintaining their grind size. And sometimes, I'm getting the grinder dialed on the espresso, and like for whatever reasons, like sometimes it's so finicky. You like do all these micro adjustments, and it'll be awesome.
Happen.
And like you go all the way, and like you end up starting where you finished, and you don't understand how that can happen, but it does over the course of like trying to figure this out. But you're like, I don't know, I ended up exactly where I started, but this is the way it should be.
Okay, so Americanos though, I have a real problem with the Americano. I think it's an affront to America, an affront to the American GI. The Americano started when American soldiers were in Europe in World War II, and they were trying to get brewed coffee.
Drip coffee, yeah.
But Europeans don't do it that way. It was very much influenced by the Italians, and it was just espresso shots. And the way, because, the language gap and all that stuff, the way they interpreted that is like, oh, the American GIs they can't handle our strong coffee here, so we need to water it down for them. And thus, so pull the espresso shot, dump some water in for that pansy GI that's, saving you from Nazi Germany, and send him on his way. And, the American GIs are like, oh, this tastes like shit. And these guys don't know how to make coffee. And they're like, oh, these guys can't handle our coffee. And so the Americano and that's why they called it an Americano, is because that was what they gave the Americans, because they thought they couldn't handle the just pure espresso. And so whenever I can, I avoid the Americano.
See, I'm the exact opposite. I'm the exact opposite. I'm like, I love the Americano. So like I always have like my espresso Americano or Americano is always, it's an 8-ounce cup, 3/4 full. So that's what it is. It's a double espresso shot, 3/4 full in an 8-ounce cup. It's strong because basically you have 2/3 water, 1 part espresso as you're looking at an 8-ounce cup. So for me, like I always look at it as like, this is my test for any and all. So I'll always order a shot of espresso and an Americano because I want to taste it as espresso and I want to taste it as an Americano to see what the difference is. And then if it's good in both parts, I'm like, okay, this barista knows what the fuck they're doing, right? Like but I have to taste it in both parts.
Yeah, because they can mess up. Like an Americano should be a double and then water at 170 degrees. And a lot of times they'll give you super boiling hot, like
Fucking
207, 208 Fahrenheit water, and like you're ruining.
You're burning.
That's not how it's supposed to be.
Burning the cup, and then. But I always think about it as like, hey, this is part of my lineage here. Of like, I've got to be like directly connected to the Americano. I love it. I love the Americano.
I love the name. I like that that's the name, but I just don't like that it came from.
Yeah, see, I just embrace it. Like, oh yeah, sure, I'm a crayon eater. I don't care.
Yeah, that's true.
Go ahead.
You've got experience with this.
be demeaning towards me. So yeah, I take that. Like, yeah, sure, I'll just embrace that.
So tell us about the book, because that's really what I would say is like, it's a good excuse for you to come out here. that's what we want to talk about.
Yeah. So the book is called Send Me, The True Story of a Mother at War. I wrote that with Joe Kent, who was on the show not too long ago, about his late wife,
Awesome, dude.
Shannon Kent.
Yep.
Yeah. So Shannon was an amazing woman. Just as a flat statement there, how was she amazing? Was a woman in special operations before women were even allowed in combat roles. She had 4 combat deployments before that memo was signed saying women can be in combat roles now. Spoke 5 languages plus multiple dialects. Cancer survivor, ran marathons. Mother, got her bachelor's degree, her master's degree while in active duty, serving at these very high levels. Just amazing artist. I mean, if you go to Joe's house right now, he's got this dining room table that's this complex mosaic tree that she made one night. You know, they had an amazing garden, you know, that she tended to, and just all these things that, like, how do you fit that all in a day, a week, just the type of life that they lived. And they were a real life, like Mr. and Mrs. Smith, right? Mm-hmm. In that they both were serving at the very highest levels of the special operations and intelligence communities and doing things that we probably, you know, won't know about for another 25, 50 years, you know? And in the book, I think that's the thing, is like, this is the most complete story about Shannon's life. And I should say she was killed tragically via suicide bomber on January 16th, 2019 in Manbij, Syria, alongside Chief Jonathan Farmer. Scotty Wirtz, who was a former Navy SEAL, who was contracting for the DI at that time. I think you knew Scotty.
I did, yeah. I did a couple trips with him in Kabul.
Yeah, and then Gadir Taher, who was a Syrian American interpreter that was working, again, obviously at a very high level. She was with these group of people. And then, so those are the 4 Americans, and there was another 11 Syrian defense forces that were killed in this explosion. And this was, like, where this book came from. One, you don't hear these stories if these people are still alive, right? Like, there is, like in the special operations community, we like to say we're like quiet professionals or silent professionals. There is no more of a quiet professional than the people that work in this little corner of the intelligence community and special operations community. You don't hear about them if they're alive for decades. It's only in death that we can tell their stories. And even then, you know, we had to be really, really careful, because a lot of the stuff that she was working on, I was told by multiple people that, you know, they couldn't quite tell me what, but the things that she was working on will impact national security for the foreseeable future, for years to come. You know, I don't know that any of us can say that about our work in the military, right? Like it will impact national security for years to come. Just incredible. And yeah, she was killed on her 5th. She did 9 total military deployments. 5 of them were active combat zones. You can use your imagination on the rest of them. And, you know, that 5th combat deployment to Syria, she left behind 2 young boys, a 1 and a 3-year-old sons, Colt and Josh. And it's a tragic story, but one that I think a lot of people can draw inspiration from, not just because she was a woman, not just because she was any of these titles, right? Like, but the totality and the impact, and the fact that at the end of the day, she lived her life with love and she gave a shit. Like, she cared. She didn't stop. Like, so a quick thing that I'll dive into real quick here. I mentioned that she was a cancer survivor. She got some cancer cut out of her throat, went back to work the next day. From what I understand, wasn't even put on a temporary profile. She didn't want it. She wanted to just go back to work. And years later, when she was accepted into a PhD program to go be a psychologist, because she wanted to go help what she saw was happening. She, one of her SEAL commanders earlier in her career, committed suicide on a deployment to Afghanistan, and that really affected her. And she saw people starting to fray at the edges as the war went on, you know? And so she wanted to help that out, and also knew that, like, she wanted to be around to raise her sons and all that sort of stuff. So she applied to this PhD program. They ended up turning her down because they missed earlier on that she had cancer in her medical records. And so now all of a sudden, because she didn't meet for the standards to become an officer, because officers have to meet accessions medical standards, like if you're joining fresh off the street, not retention. And so she couldn't do that. Instead of, when I say she gave a shit, instead of just saying, oh, shucks, it is what it is, or making like a half-assed attempt to like go get a waiver and then getting kind of turned down and just, okay, I guess it is what it is. Like that's a common phrase in the military, it is what it is. I don't think she was a person that used that all that often. At some point, she got as high in the chain of command as she could, trying to fight that. And they said, hey, if you want to change this, you're going to have to go to Congress. She's like, well, I guess I'm going to fucking Congress.
What?
Yeah. And there's these pictures of her, put on her best pantsuit and went around knocking on doors on Capitol Hill until somebody would listen to her. And it wasn't until, those things don't change overnight, obviously, but they eventually did change after she was killed. And there are officers in the United States Navy today that are officers because of the advocacy she did. And that's just one example, but she was one of those people that wasn't just good at her job, wasn't just this elite operator or whatever. Like she cared for the people that she worked with, that worked for her. She took the anchors she wore as a Navy chief, she took that very seriously. And there's just so many people that you talk to where they attribute them being where they're at in their life and basically still being around, kind of insinuating that maybe, they would have taken things into their own hands at a certain point if it wasn't for Shannon,
right?
And her caring, and so it's just one of those. It's not just that she was a great intelligence operator, or that she was doing special operations stuff or did all these deployments, or it's like, man, the impact that she had on the people around her, and just the mark that she left on this world. And that's why there's a whole ass book written about her now, so that we can spread this message as far as we can, not just memorialize her. We hear the phrase all the time of, heroes die twice, right? Once on the battlefield and once when people quit talking about them. I and Joe too, we both want Shannon Kent to be this name that lives on through time, is mentioned in the same breath as people like Virginia Hall and other kind of historic people, and that had a brick in the foundation of this country and our successes. And, that this book is the first step in making sure that her name stays alive and doesn't stay in the shadows. Like it would, like I said, if she was still around today, there wouldn't be this book.
Right.
She'd still be quietly doing her work. And, there's something to be said about that. But because she did die, because she did, was killed in action, going after some of the worst people on the planet. She was working that that counter ISIS mission, going after the worst people that we have seen in some time. Because she gave her life doing that, we can now use that story and not just memorialize her name, but hopefully inspire other people. Hopefully this is a book that the intelligence community can point at and say, hey, this is like, for Rangers, we have like Black Hawk Down, right? Or, different things like that, like the intel community, hopefully they can point it, and this will be that thing for them. And, I've got 2 young daughters, my youngest daughter, her middle name is after Shannon. And, both of them, when they're a little bit older, they're going to be reading this book. And this is going to be who we're pointing at as, example number 1 for how to live a life.
Yeah, so give us some more background from her life, just, like her family, like when did she join the Navy? Like give us a little bit more of her bio.
Yeah. So she grew up in the Hudson River Valley area north of New York City there. Both her dad and her uncle were 9/11 first responders. Her uncle was a firefighter. Her dad was a New York State policeman. And it was shortly after she'd already had kind of plans to join the military. After 9/11, that kind of solidified everything. And both her and her younger brother ended up joining the military. He joined the Marines and had a long, very successful career there at the highest levels of Marine Special Operations. And she went into the Navy initially as a cryptological technician linguist. And, or I think at the time it may have been called cryptological technician interpretive. I'd have to check my notes on that. But so her path into the Navy was, go to Navy boot camp. And then she was off to Monterey, California to go do DLI, the Defense Language Institute, which is the premier language institution in the world, I would guess. And her language was Arabic. She crushed it there. I mean, this isn't going to make a lot of sense to a lot of people, but the DLPT, the test that you take that says like how well you know a language, like can you speak it, can you write it, can you read it? Yeah. She was a 3.32 coming out of DLI, which is like a lot of people don't ever get to a 3.32 ever in their career, especially not right out of the schoolhouse. And then, so her path after that was, which is the path of a lot of people that go into the cryptologic world. She was shipped off to Fort Gordon, Georgia, to start doing sort of that ground level, sort of entry level work. And it's, the sort of work that you're in the stereotypical windowless room with headphones on doing, and it's important work, certainly, but it's not. She joined because she wanted to go take it to the enemy, So she volunteered to go to Iraq. She did what the Navy calls, she was an individual augmentee. She volunteered for a tasker, had no idea this tasker was to go be a part of a joint special operations task force until she kind of shows up with a SEAL team and is like, okay, I guess we're doing it. And she didn't, Joe told me that even when he met her, when he met her, she told her that even on that deployment, she didn't quite understand what she was a part of. Like, she just thought this is like what the military looked like. This is just what Iraq looks like, Everybody's in great shape and killers and, so, and she just got to it. And the thing about Shannon was, modern standard Arabic is like the equivalent of speaking Shakespearean English. It's not what the average, they know it because that's the version of Arabic that's used in the Quran, so they know it, but it's not how they speak. And so she went the extra mile, and she started consuming music, movies, reading magazines and newspapers in that language so that she could talk and communicate in the way that they do, and not just in one dialect, but in multiple. That first deployment, a lot of times, so she was with both, it was a SEAL team and a Special Forces ODA that were charged with training up the Iraqi special operations. And this was very early on in that mission set, from what I understand. But those, this compound that they were on, at, lunchtime, for example, it looked kind of like a middle school dance. All the Iraqis are over here doing their thing and all the Americans are over here. She would go sit with them. And that's kind of where her legend was born, because she'd be holding a conversation with three different guys. One's a Kurd, one's Shia, one's Sunni, or some sort of mix like that. Different parts of the country, or maybe one's from Syria, or one grew up in Jordan, or something like that. And so they're all very different dialects. She would be having a conversation just like we are right now, but using one dialect with you, one with you, just seamlessly throughout. And so that got her noticed pretty quickly. They started saying like, "Oh shit, she can communicate with these guys." SEALs and SF. I mean, SF guys, they go to language training, but they're not usually fluent.
No.
And so like, oh, we could use this. And then she started to show that she had a knack for not just translating, but she could get information out of people. She could do human. She was trained in signals intelligence. She knew the technical side. She knew the human side. And usually collection and analysis are kind of two separate functional areas, right? She could do both. And so now all of a sudden, when it came down to, these guys, they're looking at Shannon and saying, we can kind of use her as like a one-stop shop to get missions greenlit. Like, this is somebody that can really move the needle for us on what we're trying to get done over here. And so she ended up getting moved around, and suffice it to say, she never went back to Fort Gordon. I think she went back to Clear or whatever. But like shortly after that, the Naval Special Warfare was standing up this new thing for non-SEAL support to the SEALs. It was called the Direct Support Course. It was a new thing to sort of, hey, if we're going to have these augmentees coming out to support SEAL operations, they need to have some sort of training. There needs to be some sort of selection or screening process.
I know the guy that actually started that.
Yeah. So Shannon was the first woman to graduate from it. And she graduated second in her class, male or female.
Right.
And immediately got to work at the SEAL teams. And that's where she started her career. She did 3 deployments there, and then went to selection for a different classified special operations unit, passed, and then deferred her further training course that would come after that to go on one more Afghanistan deployment with her unit because she didn't want to leave them high and dry, and was kind of a more senior person at that point. She wanted to be there for the younger folks, and went and did that and came back, and then that's where she met Joe. Her and Joe actually technically met on her first deployment in Iraq, just briefly during an intel briefing that Shannon was giving, and they had a little exchange there. And then Joe will tell you that his intention was to come back like the next week and like get her email address or something, because there was pretty clearly a connection right off the bat there. But it was 7 years later where they met at this training course that they were both going through. And you look at, by the way, just to, because there's only so much we can say about that part of their lives, but we'll say this. Joe was an Army Ranger, a Special Forces, a Green Beret, who started off as a 18 Bravo and then became a Chief Warrant Officer there. He's going through the same training course with Shannon. Like, this is the type of place this was, and so they go through this, and then, in the book, when we get to this part, for obvious reasons, we start to focus more on the family life and them having kids and things like that, because there's just, maybe there's a more well-rounded book that can be written in 25 or 50 years.
Right.
But for now, we focused on the family, and there was a lot of stuff going on there. Like I said, she was getting her undergrad or master's degree, had some kids, was running marathons, was doing all sorts of stuff. And then we kind of, her and Joe get married rather quickly. And then we kind of fast forward to 2018, where after the PhD plans fell through and her going over to be a Navy psychiatrist, next deployment's up. It's time to go over to Syria, and she has to make a heartbreaking decision to, it's special operations, right? Like, anybody at any time can quit, right? Like, say, I'm not doing it, right? It's a volunteer, it's an all volunteer unit. But the type of people that find themselves in these units, they are not the type of people to do that.
Right.
And even though she was torn about leaving her, like I said, her boys were 1 and 3 years old. Joe had just retired from the Army and had switched over to be a paramilitary officer over at the CIA. He also had his first deployment with them coming up. So this was going to be the first time that they were both going to be gone, which they had always made sure that one of them was always home. So it was a really tough decision. And of course, she goes over, and about 2 months, or just shy of 2 months into the deployment, that's when the attack happened while she was out getting after it. And really tragic thing. And then Joe, like I said, he was deployed. He had to rush back, from the corner of the world that he was in. Not an easy place to get home from. And then it was, a couple of weeks later, you texted me and said, "Hey, Marty, this guy Joe Kent reached out. Did you see about that explosion in Syria a couple of weeks ago?" "Yeah." "Well, he's the husband. I want you to talk to him." And that's where it started.
Yeah. So Joe was connected to me through another friend, and he reached out, or I reached out to him just to pass condolences. And I was on a run in San Antonio. So I was like 5 miles away from my house, and it was like 100 degrees or whatever. It's like it's fucking humid and shitty. And I was like, I answered the phone. Well, then Joe and I sat there. I had a long conversation, probably 45 minutes, first conversation we ever had. And it was whatever you want.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter. Like, so that's when I connected him to you, not obviously with the intention with the book in mind.
No,
like,
that
it was,
wasn't
hey,
even...
what can we do to help? How can we do anything for Joe and his family? Because obviously this is a huge, this is quite possibly the biggest thing that will ever happen in somebody's family life. And that turned into a series of stories. And then I think it evolved, obviously, when it was the book proposal.
Yeah. So Shannon was killed on January 16th, 2019. It was shortly after that you connected us, and I found out that Joe and Shannon had actually, they read that Valley Boys story that we were talking about earlier, and they were fans of Black Rifle. There's that picture of Shannon; she's wearing a Black Rifle shirt, and he knew the New York Times, Washington Post, they were all going to write big profiles, and they did, and they were fine. But he wanted somebody that was like from the community that would like really get it. And, you know, that's certainly the way I've always tried to build myself is like, hey, I'm the guy that like you reach out to. If it's like again, no names, no faces, you can trust them to do the right thing when telling these stories. And so we start off, you know, when we first talked on the phone, Joe's big thing was, so when the explosion first happened, the way it was being categorized in the media, and I think it was because the Department of Defense originally put it out this way, was they were killed while out to lunch.
Correct.
It sounded like they were just out like
chilling,
running to Burger King on Bagram, you know, something like that. Like, and I remember when I saw those initial news reports, and you just look at the bios: former SEAL, DIA, civilian interpreter, SF warrant officer, a Navy cryptological linguist. Like, been around for a minute. I was like, I don't think that that's what they were doing, you know. And at first, I initially thought that it was just like, oh, this is probably, you know, who I thought that they were. And is like, oh, they're putting this out because they can't say, for the same reason, even in death, there's a star that gets put on the CIA wall, right? Like, I figured it might be something like that. Well, it wasn't that case. And it pissed Joe off that they were being categorized in that way. And he wasn't looking for a bunch of detail. You know, he'll tell you, if they would have just said, hey, they were killed in action pursuing the enemies of the United States, something generic like that, maybe there never would have been a story, a book, or anything. You know, it was because of the way that they categorize things. He was like, no, that ain't right. You know? And so I went out for the memorial service on February 7th and 8th. So a couple of weeks later. And, you know, initially went to the house. And I remember being real nervous. I went to their family home, and of course they've got all, you know, family over there, all these people there to support Joe and the kids. And they're in town for the memorial that's going to happen at the Naval Academy Chapel. She was the first enlisted sailor to ever be allowed to have their memorial service at the Naval Academy's chapel. And I remember going over there, I was a little bit nervous, you know, because it's like, man, am I going to walk in and it's like, it's going to be a man in shambles. He just lost his wife, mother of his children. Like, I can't even fucking fathom what this guy is going through, you know? And I went in and like, man, I will tell you, I've got so much respect for Joe just right off the bat, because completely put together, mission focused on like, hey, we're here to tell Shannon's story. Like, it wasn't a mess. It wasn't any of that sort of stuff. It was right off the bat, like, let's do this. You know, sit down at the table with another one of their mutual friends, Ali, and we did that initial interview. And then it was either that same day or the next day, I forget. And I think it was that same day. Later that day, we went over to the Naval Academy, and I was the only media allowed in there. And the type of people that were, this is when I started to understand this was even more than what I initially thought it was. Because you looked around this place, this was like a who's who of the highest levels of the special operations and intel community. Like, some people that I recognized, and I was like, okay, you get a real sense of like the audience that was here. And then, you know, they had some speakers up there. The reason I was the only media allowed there is because most of these people in the audience like couldn't have their faces out there, still doing highly sensitive work. And again, I was just trusted to be there and do the right thing, and we did. And so we came away from that. And I remember telling Joe that night, we, you know, after the thing, there was like a hail and farewell. And then after that, you know, and drinks are flowing and all that sort of stuff. And I remember telling Joe, I was like, hey, just want you to know, like, and I'm sure you've probably got other people hitting you up about this, but if you are considering a book, like, let me throw my hat in the ring. I think I could do it right, you know? And he was like, and, you know, to his credit, he was very non-committal. He's like, yeah, man, you know, like, he didn't agree to it or say, let's do it. It was like, I think he was waiting to see how all these different profiles were going to turn out. And then, you know, and I don't think he was completely sold yet on the idea of doing a book either. He still was employed by the CIA. He hadn't had his, you know, stuff rolled back yet. I think he knew that he was going to have to leave that life behind, but hadn't formally done it yet. And so this was all super fresh. Well, fast forward to May 14th, yesterday, I hit publish on the profile I wrote on Shannon, which was the most comprehensive of all the stories. And I did that from the hotel in Washington, D.C., because I was down there to interview Katie Pavlich and do the National Police Week coverage down there. Hit publish on that, send it to Joe. Like, at first he's like, yeah, looks good, man. And then like 2 hours later, he called me. He's like, hey, dude, yeah, me, the whole family, everybody, we think this is by far the best thing that's been written about Shannon. You really got her. You really captured her. Like, let's start working on a book. And that kind of set in motion, you know, and that was 5 years yesterday. That really set in motion, like, okay, now you got to start putting a proposal together and stuff. And all, again, just speaking of like the whirlwind of all of this, it took us, you know, 4, 5, 6 months, whatever, till October to finish that proposal. I hit send on that the morning from Moshi, Tanzania, the day that I was supposed to head out. I remember, so you might know him, Terry Finley, longtime 10th Special Forces Group guy, Sergeant Major. He's yelling at me from the trucks, the Land Rovers, like, Marty, we got to fucking go. And I'm sitting here like making my last 1 minute because I know I'm going to be off grid for the next 10 days or whatever. Hit send on that and just take off for the mountain. And I like, hope it turns out okay. You know, when we came back off the mountain and checked it, everything was good. And by December, we had set meetings with multiple different interested publishers and ended up going with the ones that were not interested in a special operations tell-all or expose or wanting all these details about the places that they were, but the editor and the publisher that was like, no, we want to just know the human story. We think this is an inspiring story, and we're just as interested in the dynamic between a husband and wife serving at that level, more so than we are about the nitty gritty of whatever military stuff that you were doing.
Right.
And then that started, I remember I pretty much came from there and flew out to San Antonio. And I remember you being like, Marty, what the fuck are you doing here? Because I just kind of came out and it's like, hey guys, I might need a little bit of time to work on this. And then of course we didn't do that. It was just like, hey, let's just keep, like we were talking about earlier, 100% balls to the wall the entire time at Black Rifle. And then Logan, you kind of saw it firsthand. It's me, we're driving somewhere and I'm in the back seat cranking away, trying to get this thing done. And, took longer than I thought. Turns out it's really hard to write about somebody that is one, no longer with us, but two, their entire adult life is classified.
Right.
And you think about it too, right after that, that's when like the pandemic stuff kicked off and travel became difficult for a while there. Plus all the Eddie Gallagher stuff kicked off. So anybody in NSW and kind of that world, they got real clammy about the media. Anybody that could have been able to talk. And then of course, all the other people that she worked with in those other parts of her professional life, they're already were not going to talk to anybody in the media or anybody writing a book or anything like that. So it was really difficult at times, but we stand here today in 2024 and we've got what I think is the best possible outcome of a book that we could have done with what we had to work with. Like I said, 25, 50 years, maybe there's a more complete story to be told, but like with what we have right now, I think we did right by Shannon. I know Joe is really happy and the family is really happy. And at the end of the day, that's really all that fucking matters. Everything else is second to that. Colt and Josh, her two sons will have a thing that they can reference as they get older and want to know about their mom because they'll have been too young to probably really remember her firsthand. And, we did it the right way. We didn't succumb to trying to reveal any salacious details or anything like that. We put it through pre-publication review with both the CIA and the DOD, and we did it the right way. I think we did her story justice. And I don't remember what the original question was. I kind of went on a tangent there, but
it's a great tangent.
Yeah,
it's like it's a perfect amount of tangent actually.
Okay.
Well, I think that Joe is such an interesting person by himself, right?
Yep.
So like he has his own story that he could tell, but he chose to tell her story, which honestly is I think it's probably it showcases the character of the man and how much she meant to him specifically. Obviously I've known Joe for quite a while. I have the utmost respect for him, and he has a ton of credibility for everything that he's done. But this is really, I think, telling as to how he wants to tell her story. He really does. I mean, he continues to be out there. I mean, he was just on Jocko's podcast. He's been on our podcast a few different times, and he really puts the story first, and that just showcases, I think, the guy's ethics. Like truly, I mean, he's running for office. And it would be really easy for him to try to publicize this and then somehow try to capture the inertia from the book and then roll that into his political career. And he doesn't do it. And I'll tell you that from like just firsthand objective looking in, saying like, he's a great man and she was a great woman. Yep. So I'm just happy and proud that we've been somewhat part of this entire process as far as putting the pieces together, helping it all come to light. And then obviously with you having this is it's an incredible opportunity for you to showcase their family and her story.
Yeah, it's possibly the most worthwhile when I think about what's worth it to work on. What's worth it to pour that amount of yourself into over that amount of time and everything. There's nothing that's higher than this. There's nothing else that I could. I even think about it now. It's like I'm going to have to think of at some point. What's the next thing I'm going to work on, and all of it just pales in comparison because there's just nothing like this. There's nobody like Joe. There's nobody that was like Shannon. It's just their story is so incredible. And yeah, to speak to Joe's humility, him writing out those conversations that they had as a couple, like really intimate conversations that frankly didn't always show him in the best light. He made himself he could have whitewashed over that if he wanted to, and nobody would have said a thing.
No.
He chose to put that truth out there and really be vulnerable there. In a guy that already takes a lot of heat as it is, but he really wanted to reflect the truth of the decisions that they were faced with, the challenges they faced, and do right by Shannon. That's from day one. All he's been trying to do is do right by Shannon. That's why it was hard for him. He'll tell you, he never saw himself doing anything else other than being, a commando and eventually going into, do the stuff that he was doing in the agency and everything. And, to leave all that behind, especially after your wife is killed by people he could have gone back over there, but he said, no, I can't risk orphaning my boys. Shannon would never forgive me.
Yeah.
No matter how strong that pull for vengeance, I can't even imagine.
Yeah.
The fact that he's had to make so many hard choices to just do right by Shannon and their boys, I really don't think most people can fully comprehend. No. I really don't.
And I don't think you can really comprehend just by listening to his talk, how amazing Shannon was until you really get into the nitty gritty of the book. And I was reading the book at night, and there's many different parts where you're kind of given indications as to how amazing Shannon is and what makes her unique and different, and the quality of human she was. And so I'm going through it. I'm the part where she was pregnant for the first time. I'm reading it. She's she ran a marathon while she was pregnant. She ran 2 marathons. She ran 2 marathons and a Tough Mudder while she was pregnant. I'm laying next to my pregnant wife. I'm like, Shannon Kent ran 2 marathons and a Tough Mudder while she was pregnant. And that's just one little story of this. But that part of her, from a very early age, and the monkey bars story where, she wasn't able to do the monkey bars like the boys, and she did the monkey bars until she got blisters on her hands.
Little 3rd, 4th grader with bloody hands from the monkey bar. No kid's doing that.
Yeah, and then later the willingness for her to have the courage to have these conversations when some of the guys who are working with indigenous forces are kind of little standoffish. She's the one with the courage to step forward and speak their language and make those connections with those guys, and kind of the story that wraps the whole book together with her having this conversation with the sheik and this language that's foreign to her, and having it be really you encapsulate how smart and intelligent she is. And her ability to navigate the human intelligence side of things, you really grasp she was beauty, she was brains, she was brawn. How do you surmise what made her different? How is she even possible as a human? I've never heard of anything like it.
Yeah, I mean, if you were watching this in a movie or reading it in a fiction book, or if this was a character in one of Jack's books, you'd be like, good character. Never happened in real life, but great character, fun to watch, fun to read.
You can't do that.
No, this person actually existed. This is a real story. And I'll tell you too, on that front, if some of these parts almost seem unbelievable, we've talked to everybody in every facet of her life at this point that has read the book, and her family is yep, you nailed it. I've had chance to speak with some of her former coworkers, supervisors, yep, all the stuff on the military, you nailed it. This is all real. This stuff happened. This is who she was. This person existed. it's really, really wild when you think about that.
I think that it's important for us to capstone it and then also tell people to go read the book, and not only go read the book because we don't want to disclose too much to prevent people from buying and reading the book, because I think it's a really important read. I definitely think it's a really important read if you have children.
Yep.
Definitely if you're, like I have 2 little girls, you've got girls, and, strength through, female characterization of strength is like, I think this is it's almost like a playbook, if you will, right? So not that we don't have powerful and strong wives, but it gives them another character reference in their lives to look at and say, oh, this is also possible. So where can they buy it?
Pretty much everywhere books are sold. So if you're a hardcover person, you want that physical book, you can find that all the places online that sell books, but also your local Barnes & Noble or whatever bookstore, they've all got it. If you're an audiobook person, that's available. If you're an ebook person, that's available. And pretty much everywhere you find books. So there's really, you got to go out and get it. And really, the purpose of this is to get the story heard as far and wide as possible. So my ask is get the book and then lend it to a friend.
Right.
Or buy 2 books and lend it to it. When it's Mother's Day, Father's Day, Christmas, birthdays, consider this as a gift that you're going to, the more people we can put this story in the hands in, go to your local library. If they're not carrying it, ask them why they're not carrying it. Like, we need this story to get out there. We need this to hit as many touch points as possible. And that's only going to happen with people picking up the book, reading it, and then going and telling people about it. And I think we wrote the book in a way that will leave people wanting to talk about it. I think it's the way it ends. And God, I don't want to spoil anything, but like, there's the epilogue and a specific thing with Joe and his boys. It's kind of 6 months after the fact. Like, I've read that hundreds of times at this point, probably through the writing and editing process, and I still tear up at it. Like, it really, I don't know if just as a father, like I just, so I think it'll leave people wanting to talk about it, but they should go out there and do that. And it's just, it's a really, really important story, and this thing on the kids. So neither of my kids are, I think, quite old enough yet to read it. There's, for the most part, it's fairly age appropriate for a lot of ages, but there's a couple of things in there where we talk about some of the uglier side of what ISIS did and in the region. And so for that reason, I think my oldest daughter will have to wait a few more years probably before she goes through this. But the day after published, she wanted to take the book to school to do show and tell, and now her teachers want to read it. That's a win.
Right.
She was excited, and I had her, I was like, hey, if you're going to take this for show and tell, you got to be able to talk about Shannon. It's not just my dad wrote a book.
Yeah.
No, this is about Shannon.
Right.
And so she had her like 5 facts about Shannon Kent that she went in with. And, and like, for my daughter, this is a real thing. She's seen her dad working on this for years now. This has been, dad's too busy to do something because he's, this has been that thing that I've spent away from my kids, right, to accomplish. And so it's a very real thing, at least for my oldest daughter. And so for her, it was really cool to see how into it she was. She wanted to know more about Shannon Kent. She wanted to know about this thing that Dad had been spending so much time on. And then it was her idea to take it to show and tell. I didn't say that. I didn't know they did show and tell in her class. She hadn't brought it up before. So, but she's like, I want to take this to show and tell tomorrow. And that's where we're like, okay, so what are the 5 things about Shannon Kent? Go. And I think she was able to spit off 4 of them off the top of her head. And then I had to help her with the 5th one, and that was a cool thing. And I bring that up of like, hey, it's like you said, yeah, you're as parents, we're our kids' biggest influence, but kids naturally gravitate to, athletes or astronauts or what are these other outside figures. Gosh, Shannon Kent should probably be in pole position for who your kids look at after you and mom. Or mom and dad. So,
Marty, thank you so much. Good to have you back, buddy.
Yeah, this is awesome.
Go buy the book. Thank you, guys.